Welcome to While We Were Distracted, the podcast where we explore topics that often get overshadowed in the rush of daily life.
Today, we're going to try and cut through a lot of the noise around a really vital issue, the huge long-term economic recovery of Ukraine. So our mission today is a pretty crucial one. We've got sources that focus on BlackRock's role in this whole situation. And, whenever that name comes up with Ukraine, the conversation just immediately jumps to peace talks.
Right, or some kind of backroom geopolitical deal.
Exactly. And we need to be really surgical here. We are not diving into diplomacy. This is a deep dive into finance.
Yeah, and that's a really, really key distinction to make. Our sources are crystal clear on this. BlackRock was not involved in official peace talks, not in ceasefire negotiations with Russia, nothing like that.
So what is their role then?
Their involvement is purely structural. It's all about creating an investment framework. They're building a mechanism, the Ukraine Development Fund, designed to mobilize trillions in private capital for the country's reconstruction.
Okay, so if you're listening, get this straight. This is about financial architecture. It's about risk and the mechanics of rebuilding a country, not diplomatic handshakes. We've got the whole timeline, and we're going to unpack it. Let's start at the very beginning. The scale of the destruction it's just catastrophic. So the recovery effort has to be equally massive. Why did Ukraine turn to a giant like BlackRock in the first place?
Well, the need goes way beyond just immediate aid. You have governments, the U.S., the EU, and banks giving a lot of money, which is critical for humanitarian needs for the budget.
Sure, but that money runs out.
Exactly. It's finite. To manage a rebuilding effort that's estimated at, $500 billion, covering huge projects in energy infrastructure, you need something else. You need private investment and a lot of it. They had to send a signal to the world that Ukraine was a serious place to put your capital, not just a recipient of aid.
Right.
And that's why you bring in a name like BlackRock.
A sophisticated move. So when did this all become official?
Things move pretty fast, actually.
Yeah.
Late 2022. They signed what's called a Memorandum of Understanding, an MOU, in November. That was followed by a full detailed agreement in May of 2023.
And that agreement was between the Ukrainian Ministry of Economy and
BlackRock says
the advisory unit.
that's the one. And the Ukrainian government, they framed this as a huge win, a massive strategic victory.
I remember that. They said it was the strongest possible signal to the global market.
Absolutely.
Right.
President Zelensky himself called it the biggest investment case for Ukraine since independence. The message was pretty clear. If BlackRock is designing the system, it must be safe. It must be viable for everyone else.
The scale is just staggering. But let's clarify BlackRock's actual function here, because this is where a lot of the confusion comes in. Are they writing checks to build new roads?
No, and that's the key. They are acting entirely as consultants. The agreement is specifically with BlackRock's Financial Market Advisory Unit, the FMA. Right. And that unit doesn't actually invest money for BlackRock's main clients. They provide advice, analytics, consulting. They tell you how to structure these massive financial vehicles. So their job is to design the Ukraine Development Fund. They're writing the rule book, designing the security protections, the whole legal framework. They coordinate things to bring in other investors.
So they're the architects, not the builders. They're designing the pipeline, but they aren't pouring the concrete themselves.
Perfect analogy. That's exactly it. They're building the engine, and their name on it validates the whole project.
And that validation is everything.
It is. BlackRock ended 2022 with, $8.59 trillion in assets under management. When their advisory unit says the structure is sound, institutional investors all over the world, they sit up and they pay attention.
And it wasn't just BlackRock, was it? There were other big names involved in an advisory role.
That's right. To really make this look solid, to commit to transparency, Ukraine also brought in JP Morgan and McKinsey to help out with strategy and financial modeling. A multi-firm effort to make this thing bulletproof.
Okay, let's talk about making it bulletproof, because this is where we have to pivot to political risk. Our sources have a fascinating update from just this month, December 2025, where the whole landscape just shifts dramatically.
And this is where finance and politics just collide head-on. After President Trump's reelection, this huge cloud of uncertainty just settled over Ukraine's future. And as you said, investors hate uncertainty.
So what happened to the fund? What was the immediate fallout?
It just froze everything. BlackRock had been out there actively looking for the first round of investors for the fund.
And they were having success, right?
They were.
Yeah.
They were on track to get about $2.5 billion secured from development banks, from other countries, some private money. But then the election happened, and BlackRock halted the search completely.
Because you can't raise money for a project when you don't know if its biggest backer is going to pull the plug.
You just can't. The geopolitical foundation looked like it might crumble, so the money stopped.
So $2.5 billion on hold. But now, fast forward to this month, Larry Fink, BlackRock CEO, is suddenly back at the table talking directly with the new administration. What happened?
The coordination started up again. President Zelensky confirmed it himself on social media. He said Fink joined a really high-level discussion with key Trump representatives.
Who was in that meeting?
Specifically, Scott Bessent, the new Treasury Secretary, and Jared Kushner. And Zelensky made it sound very significant. He called it the first meeting of the group that will work on a document concerning reconstruction. Fink was there on a video link, directly connecting BlackRock's financial plan to the new political reality.
The presence of Bessent and Kushner? I mean, those are heavy hitters. That signals that this economic plan isn't just some side project. It's being baked into the White House's broader strategy.
Well, absolutely. It really highlights Trump's approach of using this rotating cast of outside advisors. You have Fink and his team handling the economic architecture.
The Reconstruction document.
Right. And at the same time, you have other envoys like the real estate developer Steve Witkoff reportedly leading talks with Putin and the new Army Secretary Dan Driscoll working on a peace plan.
So Ukraine is juggling three things at once. Zelensky confirmed it: a 20-point peace plan, a separate document on security guarantees, and then this third one, the Reconstruction and Joint Investment Plan. That's the BlackRock piece.
And this is the fragile part. The Ukrainian prime minister said it outright. He said their economic plans, this entire reconstruction document, it only has a chance of working if the ironclad security guarantees work, as promised by the U.S. reps in that meeting.
Wow. So one can't exist without the other? The financial structure is useless without physical security on the ground?
It makes perfect sense. Security creates a safe business environment, and then the economic engine can finally start.
Okay, so let's dig into that engine, because there's a really critical risk here in the BlackRock model itself that has to be addressed. What kind of investing is BlackRock actually known for, and is it what Ukraine really needs?
This is where we have to get really specific. BlackRock is the king of portfolio investing. They manage these enormous pools of money that buy liquid things, stocks, bonds, ETFs.
Right. The goal is to profit from growth or dividends. It's investing in things that already exist.
Exactly. But what Ukraine needs is something different. It needs direct investment. It needs capital to create new things. New power plants, new factories, reviving farms, building IT companies from the ground up.
And BlackRock's usual model doesn't really do that.
Not typically. It doesn't usually involve the hands-on operational management or, the physical creation of a specific business.
Okay, so here's the problem then. If the money coming into this fund is mostly from those portfolio investors, what's the risk for Ukraine's actual economy long term?
The risk, in a word, is asset stripping. The experts looking at this predict the investors BlackRock's FMA unit will attract are going to be portfolio investors. They're looking for returns, maybe quicker returns.
And with all the uncertainty and a proposed plan to privatize a lot of state-owned property.
There's a huge danger that the activity just focuses on buying up undervalued real estate or state assets on the cheap with the plan to just sell them later for a profit.
And that kind of activity creates wealth for a few investors, but it doesn't build a country. It doesn't create jobs or factories.
Precisely. And this is the crucial distinction for you, the listener, to understand. Is the capital generating new production, or is it just flipping cheap assets? The sources are very clear that this asset flipping model has, unfortunately, been a big part of Ukraine's economic story for 30 years.
And it hasn't led to real sustainable growth?
It has not.
So we have a massive problem. The world's best financial architect is building a fund, but its specialty leans toward a model that historically has not worked for Ukraine. How on earth do you solve that?
You solve it before the money shows up. You have to be proactive. The solution isn't to get rid of the fund, it's to build a fence around it. You establish clear, enforceable laws and rules now.
What the sources call an appropriate normative legislative framework.
Exactly. A fancy term for a defense mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
This framework has to spell out how investors can make money, it has to guarantee contracts will be enforced, and, this is the most critical part, it needs a system for monitoring the projects at every stage.
To make sure the money is being used for its intended purpose.
Yes, to control the targeted use of funds, to verify that they're doing what they said they do, and to protect against corruption or just simple asset stripping.
So if this BlackRock helps raise $2 billion for the energy sector, the rules need to ensure that money is buying turbines and rebuilding substations.
Not just buying the land the substation sits on to flip it in 6 months. The only way this works, the only path to a real future, is seeing that money flow into the productive parts of the economy. Energy, infrastructure, agriculture, IT. But that whole vision depends entirely on having that protective legal structure in place and ironclad before a single large-scale project begins.
So let's bring this all together. BlackRock's role is not diplomatic. It's not about the ceasefire. It's about designing the financial engine for Ukraine's future. It's the reconstruction and joint investment piece of the puzzle.
And what we've seen from the sources is that you can't separate that from geopolitics. BlackRock can build the most brilliant fund in the world, but for it to actually work, for capital to flow where it's needed, it is completely dependent on political certainty and those ironclad security guarantees.
The architecture needs the foundation.
It's everything.
Okay, that connection between security and the economy leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to think about. We know there's a huge stated risk of investors just stripping assets. We also know the success of this entire Ukraine development fund depends on new laws to prevent that very thing. So what specific immediate legislative priorities should Ukraine and its partners be focusing on right now to make sure these potential trillions under management actually translate into physical, productive capacity and not just quick real estate deals? That's the question that will define the next 30 years. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Don't forget to like and subscribe for the next episode on While We Were Distracted.